The blood on the saloon floor was still warm when Beatrice Owens dropped to her knees with a brush and bucket, her hands trembling as she scrubbed away the evidence of another fight. The year was 1879, and Ouray, Colorado was as rough as they came, a mining town carved into the San Juan Mountains where silver brought fortune seekers and trouble in equal measure. She had been scrubbing floors for 3 months now, ever since her father died in a mine collapse and left her with nothing but debts and a tattered dress. The saloon owner, a cruel man named Silas Garrett, paid her barely enough to rent a corner in a boarding house, and she ate whatever scraps the cook would sneak her when no one was looking. Tonight, her stomach gnawed at itself, and her knuckles were raw from the lye soap, but she kept scrubbing because the alternative was starving in the street. The door swung open, letting in a blast of cold October air that made her shiver. She did not look up, knowing better than to make eye contact with the patrons. Most men who came into the Silver Bell Saloon were drunk or looking to get that way, and a woman on her knees was an invitation for cruel jokes or worse. She heard boots on the wooden floor, steady and measured, not the stumbling gait of someone who had been drinking. "You missed a spot near the bar," a voice said, not unkindly. Beatrice glanced up, her brown eyes meeting a pair of steady blue ones. The man standing over her was tall, with dark hair that touched his collar and a weathered face that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. He wore a simple wool coat and denim trousers, dusty from travel, and a hat he had already removed out of politeness. Something in his expression made her pause. It was not pity exactly, but a kind of recognition, as if he understood what it meant to be at the bottom. "I will get to it," she said quietly, turning back to her work. The man walked to the bar and ordered a whiskey. She could feel him watching her as she moved across the floor, her knees aching from hours of kneeling. The saloon was quieter than usual tonight. Most of the miners were still underground, working the late shift, and the gamblers had not yet arrived for their nightly games. Silas stood behind the bar, polishing glasses and eyeing the stranger with the suspicious glare he reserved for anyone he did not recognize. "You passing through?" Silas asked. "Might be. Looking for work, actually. Heard there were ranches in the valley that needed hands." Silas snorted. "Ranching around here is tough business. Most folks are too busy chasing silver to bother with cattle. Most folks do not have the sense God gave a goat," the stranger replied mildly, and Beatrice found herself suppressing a smile. She finished the floor and carried her bucket toward the back room, where she would dump the filthy water and store her supplies. As she passed the bar, Silas grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to bruise. "You are slower than usual tonight. If you cannot keep up, I will find someone who can." "I am sorry, Mr. Garrett. It will not happen again." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she forced them out anyway. She could not afford to lose this job. The stranger set his glass down with a soft clink. "Seems to me she is working hard enough. Floor looks cleaner than most places I have been." Silas glared at him. "This is not your concern." "I reckon anything I see is my concern." The stranger's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it. For a moment, the two men stared at each other, and Beatrice held her breath. Then Silas released her arm and turned back to his glasses with a dismissive grunt. She hurried to the back room, her heart pounding. No one had ever stood up for her before, not since her father died. She did not know what to make of it. When she returned, the stranger was still there, nursing his drink. The saloon had started to fill up with the evening crowd, and she moved among them, picking up empty glasses and wiping down tables. A miner grabbed her wrist as she reached for his glass, pulling her close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "How about you sit with me for a while, darling? I just got paid." I am just here to clean, sir. Please let me go." His grip tightened. "I am talking to you, girl. Show some respect." Before she could respond, the stranger was there, his hand on the miner's shoulder. "The lady asked you to let her go." The miner released her and stood up, wobbling slightly. He was built like a bull, with massive shoulders and fists the size of hams. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who thinks you should apologize." The miner swung without warning, but the stranger ducked smoothly and drove his fist into the other man's stomach. The miner doubled over, gasping, and his friends started to rise from their table. Beatrice backed away, pressing herself against the wall as the confrontation escalated. Silas shouted something, but his voice was lost in the sudden roar of the crowd. The stranger did not wait for them to attack. He grabbed the nearest man and threw him into a table, sending cards and coins flying. Another rushed at him, and he sidestepped, letting the man's momentum carry him into the bar. It was over in less than a minute. The stranger stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, while 3 miners groaned on the floor around him. Silas came around the bar with a shotgun. "Get out, all of you, and you," he pointed the gun at the stranger. "Do not come back." The stranger picked up his hat, which had fallen during the fight, and settled it on his head. His eyes found Beatrice across the room, and for a moment, their gazes locked. Then he walked out into the night without a word. She stood there, trembling, as Silas ordered her to clean up the mess. The miners picked themselves up and left, muttering threats, and the other patrons gradually returned to their drinks and games. She fetched her bucket and brush again, scrubbing blood from the floor for the second time that night. Her mind kept returning to the stranger, to the way he had looked at her, as if she mattered. It was a dangerous thing to think about, but she could not help herself. The next morning, Beatrice woke before dawn in the cramped room she shared with 2 other women. One was a laundress who snored like a freight train, and the other was a seamstress with consumption who coughed through the night. She dressed in the dark, pulling on her only other dress, a faded blue calico that had been patched so many times it was more thread than fabric. Her breakfast was a piece of stale bread she had saved from the night before, and she ate it as she walked through the cold streets toward the saloon. Ouray was waking up around her. Miners trudged toward the mountains, their lunch pails rattling, and shopkeepers swept their storefronts. The smell of wood smoke and frying bacon drifted from the hotel restaurant, making her stomach clench with hunger. She tried not to think about it as she unlocked the saloon's back door and stepped inside. The place smelled of stale beer and tobacco, and the morning light filtering through the dirty windows revealed just how filthy it really was. She spent the next 3 hours scrubbing, sweeping, and polishing, preparing the saloon for another day of business. Silas arrived around 9, checked her work with a critical eye, and left her a small pile of coins on the bar. It was not enough. It was never enough. She was dumping wash water in the alley behind the saloon when she heard a horse approaching. She looked up and saw the stranger from the night before, sitting tall in the saddle on a rangy sorrel gelding. He dismounted when he saw her, tying his horse to a post. "Morning," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Good morning." She set down her bucket, suddenly aware of how she must look, with her hair coming loose from its bun and her dress soaked from the wash water. "I wanted to apologize for the trouble last night. Did not mean to make things harder for you. You have nothing to apologize for." Those men were drunk and stupid. A slight smile touched his lips. "That is a fact." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "My name is Mason Bradley. I bought a ranch about 5 miles out of town up in the valley. It is not much right now, just a house and some outbuildings, but I am planning to run cattle and horses." That sounds like a good plan. She did not know why he was telling her this. The thing is, it is a big place for one man. I could use someone to help with the house, cooking, that sort of thing. I know you are working here, but I thought I might offer you a position. Room and board plus wages. You would have your own room and you could come and go as you pleased. Beatrice stared at him, certain she had misheard. You are offering me a job? Yes, madam. You do not even know me. I know you work hard. I know you are in a tough situation, and I know I could use the help. He met her eyes steadily. No conditions, no expectations beyond the work itself. You would be an employee, nothing more, nothing less. If it does not work out, I will bring you back to town, no questions asked. It was too good to be true. Men did not make offers like that without expecting something in return. But when she looked at Mason Bradley, she did not see the calculating expression she had learned to recognize in men like Silas and the miners. She saw only honesty and maybe a hint of loneliness. Why would you do this for a stranger? Mason looked away toward the mountains. My mother raised me and my two brothers on her own after my father died. She worked herself to the bone to keep us fed. I watched her scrub floors in other people's houses, watched her take charity from folks who looked down on her for being poor. She never complained, but I swore that if I ever had the means, I would help someone the way folks should have helped her. So this is not charity. This is a job, fair and square, but if you need it, it is yours. Beatrice felt something crack open inside her chest, some hard shell she had built around herself to survive. She thought about her father, who had been a good man when he was sober, who had taught her to read and write, and told her she could be more than a miner's daughter. She thought about her mother, dead from fever when Beatrice was 12. She thought about the endless days of scrubbing floors and dodging, grabbing hands and going to bed hungry, and she thought about the possibility of something different. I would need to give Mr. Garrett notice. Of course. When can you start? Tomorrow, if that suits you. Mason's face lit up with a genuine smile that transformed his stern features. Tomorrow is perfect. I will come by in the morning with a wagon. Do you have much to bring? No, just a bag. Then I will see you tomorrow, Miss Owens. Beatrice Owens. Miss Owens. He tipped his hat again and mounted his horse, riding off down the alley with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. Beatrice stood there for a long moment, the bucket forgotten at her feet. Then she went inside to tell Silas she was leaving. The saloon owner did not take it well. He ranted about ingratitude and how hard it was to find decent help, but Beatrice had already made up her mind. She worked her shift that night with a lightness in her step she had not felt in months. When drunken men called for her, their words rolled off her back. When Silas snapped at her for being too slow, she just nodded and kept working. Tomorrow, she would leave this place behind. She spent her last night in the boarding house packing her few belongings into a worn carpet bag. The laundress watched her with curious eyes but did not ask questions. The seamstress coughed into her handkerchief and whispered, "Good luck," before rolling over to sleep. Beatrice lay awake in the darkness, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. What if Mason Bradley was not who he seemed? What if this was a mistake? But then she remembered the way he had looked at her, with respect and kindness, and she decided to trust her instincts. Mason arrived just after dawn, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 draft horses. He helped her load her bag, then offered his hand to help her onto the seat. The touch of his hand sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she found herself acutely aware of his presence as they started down the street. The town was quiet at this hour, with only a few early risers moving about. They passed the saloon, and Beatrice did not look back. The road out of Ouray climbed through spectacular country. Towering peaks surrounded them, their slopes covered in aspen that had turned gold with the autumn frost. The air was crisp and clean, so different from the smoky haze of the town. Mason pointed out landmarks as they drove, telling her about the valley and the people who lived there. He had a quiet way of speaking that made her feel comfortable, and she found herself relaxing for the first time in months. "I should tell you about the ranch," he said as they crested a rise. It belonged to a man named Hiram Coulter. He started it about 10 years ago, but he got too old to manage it on his own. I worked for him last winter, helped him through the hard months. When he decided to move back east to live with his daughter, he sold it to me for a fair price. The house needs work, and the barn needs a new roof before the snow comes, but the land is good. How much land? 300 acres, give or take. There is a creek that runs through it year-round and good grazing in the high meadows. I have got 20 head of cattle right now, and I am hoping to buy more in the spring. Also planning to raise horses. People always need good horses. They turned onto a smaller road that followed a rushing stream. Beatrice could see the ranch ahead, nestled in a broad valley with mountains rising on all sides. The house was a simple log structure with a stone chimney and a covered porch. The barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, weathered but solid. It was not grand, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, and she felt something settle in her chest at the sight of it. Mason pulled the wagon up to the house and helped her down. "Let me show you around." The interior of the house was sparsely furnished but clean. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A rough-hewn table and chairs stood near the kitchen area, and a pair of worn armchairs faced the fireplace. Mason led her down a short hallway to 2 bedrooms. "This one is yours," he said, opening a door to reveal a small room with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "I am in the other room, and there is a third room I use for storage. The outhouse is behind the barn, and there is a pump in the kitchen." "I know it is not fancy." "It is perfect," Beatrice said, and she meant it. The room was small, but it was hers, and the bed looked infinitely more comfortable than the lumpy mattress she had been sharing at the boarding house. Over the next few days, Beatrice settled into a routine. She woke early to start the fire and make breakfast, usually bacon and eggs and biscuits that she learned to bake in the old cast iron stove. Mason ate quickly and headed out to work on the ranch, leaving her to clean the house and prepare the midday meal. In the afternoons, she tackled larger projects, washing clothes and linens, mending torn clothing, organizing the kitchen. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way scrubbing saloon floors had never been. Mason was a man of few words, but he was unfailingly polite. He never made her feel uncomfortable or took liberties. At night, they sat by the fire after supper, and he would read from a worn copy of a newspaper or a book, sometimes reading passages aloud. Beatrice found herself looking forward to those quiet evenings, to the sound of his voice and the warmth of the fire. One evening, about a week after she arrived, Mason looked up from his book and said, "You have been doing a fine job. I want you to know I appreciate it." "Thank you." "I am grateful for the opportunity. Can I ask you something? You do not have to answer if you do not want to." She set down the sock she was mending and met his gaze. "What is it? What happened to your family? I know your father died, but was there no one else?" Beatrice was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "My mother died when I was 12. It was just me and my father after that. He was a miner, worked hard but never struck it rich. When he died in the collapse, I found out he owed money to half the town. I sold everything we had to pay the debts, but it was not enough. Silas offered me the job at the saloon, and I took it because I did not have a choice. I am sorry. That is a hard thing to go through alone. What about you? You said you had brothers." Mason smiled slightly. "2 of them. Daniel is ranching up in Wyoming, and Luke went east to become a lawyer. My mother passed a few years back. She got to see all three of us make something of ourselves, which I think made her happy. I have been working cattle since I was 15, saved every penny I could. When Hiram offered me this place, it felt like everything I had been working toward. You must be proud. I am grateful, mostly. It is a good life, but it can be lonely. He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, but Beatrice felt a pang of sympathy. She understood loneliness all too well. As the weeks passed, Beatrice and Mason fell into an easy companionship. She learned his habits and preferences, the way he liked his coffee strong and black, the way he always checked the horses before bed no matter how tired he was. He learned that she was stronger than she looked, that she had a dry sense of humor, and that she sang softly to herself while she worked. They talked more during their evening meals, sharing stories about their pasts and their hopes for the future. One afternoon in late November, Beatrice was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. She looked up to see Mason riding hard from the north pasture, his face grim. He dismounted in a rush and strode toward her. "We have got trouble. There is a storm coming in, a big one. I need to get the cattle down from the high meadow before it hits, or we will lose them." Beatrice looked at the sky, which had been clear that morning but was now darkening with ominous clouds. "What can I do? Can you ride?" "My father taught me when I was young, but it has been years." "Good enough. I need another set of hands. We have got maybe 2 hours before that storm hits." She followed him to the barn, where he saddled 2 horses with quick, efficient movements. He helped her mount a calm mare named Daisy, then swung onto his own horse. They rode out at a gallop, heading toward the high country where the cattle were grazing. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of snow. Beatrice clung to the saddle, her muscles remembering skills she thought she had forgotten. Mason led them up a steep trail that switchbacked through dense forest, emerging finally into an alpine meadow where 20 cattle grazed, oblivious to the approaching storm. "We need to push them down the mountain," Mason shouted over the wind. "Stay behind them and keep them moving. Watch for strays." They worked together, circling the herd and driving them toward the trail. The cattle were reluctant to move, sensing the storm but not understanding the danger. Beatrice rode back and forth, waving her arms and calling out, just as she had seen her father do years ago. The first snowflakes began to fall, fat and wet, quickly thickening into a curtain of white. The descent was treacherous. The trail was narrow and rocky, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Beatrice could barely see Mason ahead of her, just a dark shape in the swirling snow. One of the steers broke away, crashing into the trees, and she wheeled Daisy around to chase it. She found the animal 50 yards down the slope, trapped in a thicket of brush. She dismounted and grabbed the steer by the horns, pulling with all her strength until it broke free. By the time she got it back to the trail, she was soaked and shivering. They reached the lower pasture just as the storm hit with full force. Mason helped her dismount and practically carried her to the house, her legs numb from the cold. He sat her by the fire and wrapped her in blankets, then went to tend to the horses. When he returned, he was covered in snow and ice, his lips blue. "You saved that steer," he said, his teeth chattering. "That was brave." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Brave does not mean not being scared. It means doing what needs to be done anyway." He smiled at her, and she felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. The storm lasted 3 days, dumping several feet of snow and trapping them in the house. Beatrice cooked and rayed and watched Mason work on tack and tools in the main room. They talked more during those 3 days than they had in all the weeks before, sharing their dreams and fears and the small details of their lives. She learned that he had always wanted to have a family, a house full of children and laughter. He learned that she had dreamed of being a teacher, that she loved books and learning but had never had the opportunity to pursue it. On the third night, as the storm finally began to clear, they sat by the fire drinking coffee. Mason was quiet, staring into the flames, and Beatrice could tell he was working up to saying something. "Beatrice," he said finally, "I need to tell you something." Her heart started to pound. "What is it?" "I have grown to care about you. More than I should, maybe, given that you work for me. But I cannot help how I feel. You are smart and strong and kind, and being around you makes me happier than I have been in years. I am not asking for anything, and if this makes you uncomfortable, I will never mention it again. But I needed you to know." Beatrice set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. She had been fighting her own feelings for weeks, telling herself it was just gratitude, just the relief of being safe and fed. But it was more than that. She admired Mason's integrity, his quiet strength, the way he treated her as an equal. She loved the sound of his voice reading by the fire, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle way he handled the animals. She had fallen in love with him, and she had been too afraid to admit it even to herself. "You are not the only one with feelings," she said softly. "I have been trying to convince myself it was nothing, but the truth is I care about you too. Very much." Mason looked at her with such hope and tenderness that she felt tears prick her eyes. "Can I court you properly? I know the situation is unusual, but I want to do this right." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, you can." He stood and crossed to her chair, taking her hands in his. "I promise I will take care of you, Beatrice. I will work hard and build a good life for us. I am not a rich man, but I will do everything I can to make you happy. You already make me happy." He leaned down and kissed her, a gentle brush of lips that sent electricity through her entire body. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. Over the following months, their relationship deepened and grew. Mason was true to his word, courting her with old-fashioned propriety. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow and carved her a beautiful wooden box for her treasures. They took walks together in the evenings, talking and laughing, and he taught her to ride better so she could help him with the ranch work. She became a true partner in the operation, learning to brand cattle and mend fences and doctor sick animals. Winter gave way to spring, and the valley came alive with color. Mason bought more cattle and 3 mares he planned to breed. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, and they made plans for the future. In April, on a warm afternoon when the wildflowers were blooming in the meadows, Mason took Beatrice riding to a spot overlooking the entire valley. They dismounted and stood looking out over the land, his arm around her waist. "I want to marry you, Beatrice. I want you to be my wife, my partner in all things. Will you have me?" She turned to face him, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Yes, Mason. Yes, I will marry you." They were married in June by the circuit preacher who came through Ouray once a month. It was a simple ceremony in the small church on the edge of town, with a handful of neighboring ranchers in attendance. Beatrice wore a new dress of cream-colored muslin that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mason wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, and when he looked at her walking down the aisle, his love was written plainly on his face. The wedding night was everything Beatrice had hoped for, tender and passionate in equal measure. Mason was gentle with her, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished and desired. Afterward, they lay in each other's arms in the bed they would now share, and Beatrice felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What is wrong?" Mason asked, concerned. "Nothing is wrong. I am just so happy." "A year ago, I was scrubbing blood off saloon floors, wondering if I would survive another month. Now I am married to a good man, living on a beautiful ranch, building a life I never dreamed possible. It feels like a miracle. You made the miracle happen. You took a chance on a stranger, worked hard, gave this life a chance. I am the lucky one, Beatrice. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They kissed again and made love again, and finally fell asleep wrapped around each other as the stars wheeled overhead and the night birds called in the darkness. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and joy. They expanded the ranch, building a new barn and adding more pasture land. Beatrice discovered she had a talent for raising chickens and started a flock that provided eggs and meat. She also planted a vegetable garden that flourished in the mountain soil, providing fresh produce through the summer and fall. Mason built her a bookshelf and brought home books whenever he went to town, knowing how much she loved to read. In the late summer, Beatrice began to suspect she was pregnant. She waited until she was sure before telling Mason, choosing an evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. He had been talking about buying more horses, and she let him finish before taking his hand. "Mason, I have something to tell you." He looked at her, sensing the importance of the moment. "What is it?" "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his face unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his features, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the corral. He picked her up and spun her around, then set her down gently as if she were made of glass. "Are you sure?" "When?" "I am sure. Early spring, I think, March or April." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "A baby, our baby. I cannot believe it. This is the best news I have ever had." The pregnancy was not easy. Beatrice suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and her back ached constantly. But Mason was attentive and patient, taking on more of the household chores and refusing to let her do any heavy work. As winter set in and the snow piled high, they spent long evenings by the fire, talking about names and making plans for the nursery. In March, during a week of unseasonably warm weather, Beatrice went into labor. Mason rode to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Anderson who lived on a neighboring ranch. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Mason paced outside the bedroom door, driven nearly mad with worry by Beatrice's cries of pain. Finally, in the late afternoon, he heard a new sound. The thin wail of a newborn baby. Mrs. Anderson opened the door, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Bradley, a big, healthy boy. And your wife did wonderfully." Mason rushed into the room. Beatrice lay propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she said softly. Mason took the baby with trembling hands, marveling at the perfect tiny features, the rosebud mouth, the miniature fingers that gripped his thumb with surprising strength. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. I love you both so much." They named him James, after Mason's father, and he was a source of endless wonder and joy. Mason proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to walk the floor with a fussy baby, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his deep voice that never failed to soothe. Beatrice recovered slowly from the birth, and Mason took over many of her chores until she regained her strength. As James grew, the ranch continued to prosper. Mason's reputation as a fair dealer and a skilled horseman spread, and people came from all over the region to buy his stock. Beatrice managed the household with efficiency and grace, and she also started teaching James his letters as soon as he was old enough to sit still. She had not forgotten her dream of being a teacher, and she poured that passion into educating her son. 2 years after James was born, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the autumn she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. The little girl had her mother's brown eyes and her father's dark hair, and she was doted on by both her parents and her older brother. The house rang with laughter and the sound of children playing, and Mason often told Beatrice that this, right here, was everything he had ever wanted. The years passed quickly, full of the rhythms of ranch life. There were harsh winters and dry summers, years when the cattle prices were good and years when they barely broke even. Through it all, Mason and Beatrice faced every challenge together, their love deepening with each passing season. They added more land to the ranch, built a larger barn, and hired hands to help with the work as the operation grew. When James was 10 and Sarah was 8, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant for a third time. This came as a surprise, as she had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. But she welcomed the news, and Mason was overjoyed at the prospect of another child. This time, she gave birth to twin boys, Robert and Thomas, who kept them all busy with their boundless energy and mischievous natures. The ranch house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, with new bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Beatrice taught all the children at home, using books that Mason ordered from catalogs and newspapers that arrived monthly from Denver. James showed an interest in ranching and spent every free moment following his father around, learning the business. Sarah was quieter, more bookish, and she loved to draw and paint. The twins were too young yet to show their inclinations, but they were healthy and happy, and that was enough. One evening, when James was 15 and the twins were 5, Mason and Beatrice sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were inside, James helping Sarah with her math while the twins played with wooden blocks Mason had carved for them. It was a peaceful moment, the kind that made Beatrice's heart swell with gratitude. "You remember the day we met?" Mason asked, reaching for her hand. "I remember everything about that day. I was scrubbing blood off the saloon floor, thinking my life was over. Then you walked in. I took one look at you and knew you were special. I could not walk away. You offered me a home without conditions. No one had ever been that kind to me. Best decision I ever made. You have given me everything, Beatrice. A home, a family, a purpose. I wake up every morning grateful that you took a chance on me. We took a chance on each other." She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, hay and leather and the outdoors. "I love you, Mason Bradley. More now than I did the day we married, and I did not think that was possible. I love you too, Beatrice. Always have, always will." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. Inside, they could hear James's patient voice explaining fractions to Sarah, and the twins' laughter as they knocked over their tower of blocks. This was their life, built from nothing, sustained by love and hard work and determination. It was not perfect, but it was theirs, and it was more than either of them had dared to hope for. As the years continued to unfold, the Bradley Ranch became one of the most successful in the region. James took over more of the day-to-day operations, showing a natural talent for the business. Sarah went east to study art at a school in Philadelphia, though she returned every summer to the mountains she loved. The twins grew into strapping young men, as different as night and day, but equally devoted to their family and the land. Mason and Beatrice grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies marked by years of hard work. But their love never dimmed. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset. They still shared a bed and woke each morning in each other's arms. They had weathered storms and droughts, loss and grief, but they had done it together, and that made all the difference. When Mason was 62, he was thrown from a horse while breaking a particularly spirited colt. He broke his leg in 3 places and was confined to bed for months. Beatrice nursed him with the same dedication she had shown in all things, and though he healed slowly, he did heal. The experience reminded them both of their mortality, and they made plans to ensure the ranch would continue after they were gone. James would inherit the main property, with provisions for his siblings, and they drew up a will with the help of a lawyer from Ouray. But death did not come for them yet. They had years still ahead, years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with the changing of seasons and the eternal rhythms of ranch life. They watched their family grow and flourish, secure in the knowledge that they had built something lasting. On a warm summer evening, when Mason was 75 and Beatrice was 73, they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. Mason had grown thin and frail, his hands gnarled with arthritis, but his eyes were still bright when he looked at his wife. Beatrice's hair was completely white now, and her face was lined with wrinkles, but she was still beautiful to him, still the woman who had captured his heart in a saloon nearly 50 years before. "You have any regrets?" Mason asked her suddenly. Beatrice thought about it, really considered the question. "No," she said finally, "not a single one. My life before you was hard, but it brought me to you. Everything that has happened since has been a gift. I feel the same way. I wish I could do it all over again, every moment, good and bad." "We have been blessed, Mason. Not everyone gets a love like ours." "No," he agreed. "Not everyone does." They sat in silence, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Inside the house, they could hear the voices of their children and grandchildren, gathered for Sunday dinner as they did every week. The sound was comforting, a reminder of everything they had created together. "I love you, Beatrice Bradley," Mason said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you too, Mason. Today, tomorrow, and always." They remained on the porch long after the sun had set, 2 old people holding hands in the darkness, surrounded by the land they had worked and the family they had raised. They had started with nothing but hope and determination, a cowboy and a woman scrubbing floors in a saloon. But they had built an empire of love, and that was worth more than all the silver in the mountains. Mason passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, with Beatrice at his side. She held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering words of love and gratitude. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, ranchers and townspeople and friends from across the state, all of them testifying to the kind of man Mason Bradley had been. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a simple headstone that read, "Beloved husband, father, and friend." Beatrice lived for another 5 years, spending her days surrounded by her family and her memories. She walked the land every day, visiting the places she and Mason had loved, talking to him as if he could hear her. She read the books they had collected together and sat in the chair where he had read to her by firelight. She was not sad exactly, because she had known such happiness. She was simply waiting, counting the days until they could be together again. On a crisp autumn morning, Beatrice woke feeling lighter than she had in years. She dressed carefully in her favorite blue dress, the one Mason had always said brought out the color of her eyes. She ate breakfast with James and his wife, kissed her grandchildren, and then announced she was going for a walk. They offered to come with her, but she waved them off with a smile. She walked to the hill where Mason was buried and sat down beside his grave. The aspen trees surrounding the spot had turned gold, and the air smelled of wood smoke and approaching winter. She placed her hand on the headstone, feeling the cool granite beneath her palm. "I am ready now," she said softly. "I have stayed as long as I could, made sure the children were settled. But I miss you, Mason. I miss you every single day." She lay down on the grass, closing her eyes against the warm sun. She thought about the day they met, about all the days that had followed, the laughter and the tears, the hard work and the joy. She thought about their children and grandchildren and the legacy they had created. And she thought about Mason, waiting for her somewhere beyond this world. When James came looking for his mother an hour later, he found her lying peacefully beside his father's grave, a slight smile on her face. He knew immediately that she was gone, and though he grieved, he also felt a sense of rightness. His parents had been inseparable in life, and now they were together again in death. Beatrice was buried beside Mason, under a matching headstone. The words carved into the granite were simple but perfect. Beloved wife, mother, and friend. She was brave when it mattered most. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the Bradley family. James and his siblings told their children and grandchildren the story of how it all began. How a cowboy had walked into a saloon and offered a desperate woman a home without conditions. How that single act of kindness had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that spanned generations, a legacy that would endure. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the San Juan Mountains and painted the sky in brilliant colors, the family would gather on the porch of the old ranch house. They would hold hands and remember Mason and Beatrice, the cowboy and the woman who had built everything from nothing, whose love had been the foundation of it all. And they would give thanks, knowing that such love, such devotion, such unwavering commitment to one another was rare and precious, a gift to be treasured and honored always. The mountains stood eternal above them, silent witnesses to the passage of time, to the lives lived and lost, to the enduring power of love. The Bradley Ranch remained, a testament to what two people could create when they believed in each other, when they worked together, when they refused to give up no matter how hard the road became. It was a story worth telling, a legacy worth preserving, a love worth celebrating for all time. And somewhere, in some place beyond mortal understanding, Mason and Beatrice Bradley were together again, walking hand in hand through eternal fields, their love finally freed from the constraints of time and mortality, perfect and complete and everlasting.